They say fear reveals the truest side of the human soul, how we act when darkness closes in, when every sound feels like a whisper from the other side. Tonight, we're not just diving into horror, we're uncovering the truth that hides behind it. 3 real and deeply disturbing stories that will chill your blood. And yet, if you listen closely, they might just awaken something inside you. Courage, awareness, and a deeper faith in the light that refuses to die even in the darkest places. Every scream has a story. Every shadow carries a memory. The world isn't as simple as what we see in the daylight. There are people who walk through unimaginable terror and come back with lessons far more valuable than safety. They came back with wisdom. These aren't just scary stories. They're mirrors showing us how fragile, yet unbreakable the human spirit can be. Tonight, as we journey through 3 disturbing true tales, listen not just for the fear but for the strength that hides within it. Because sometimes, survival itself becomes a kind of miracle. Our first story takes place in a quiet suburb outside Seattle. The air there was always cold, sharp, and strangely still after midnight. Streetlights hummed with that faint electric buzz that made the night feel alive, and the sidewalks glowed pale under their flicker. Claire, a young waitress who often worked late-night shifts, had walked this path home hundreds of times before. She was used to the emptiness, to the rhythmic sound of her own footsteps echoing against the pavement. But that one night felt different. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was watchful. As she turned the familiar corner toward her apartment, her body froze before her mind could catch up. The hairs on her arms lifted, and her heart began to thump so hard it hurt. There was no visible reason, no movement, no sound, but something deep within her screamed, "Don't go home." She stopped under the dim light of a lamppost, her breath trembling in the cold air. Her mind tried to rationalize the fear. Maybe she was tired. Maybe it was just paranoia. But that feeling, that invisible weight pressing on her chest, wouldn't let her move forward. Instead, she turned and walked the opposite direction, toward a gas station about 2 blocks away. The old fluorescent lights inside buzzed weakly, and the smell of gasoline clung to the air. She walked in, smiled nervously at the attendant, and pretended to be on a phone call, saying her car had broken down nearby. The man behind the counter nodded kindly and let her wait inside. Minutes ticked by, and just as she began to feel silly for overreacting, the sound of sirens filled the night. Police cruisers sped past, their red and blue lights cutting through the darkness like blades. She ran outside, heart pounding. They stopped in front of her apartment complex. Later, she learned that a neighbor had called 911 after seeing a shadowed figure prying open her door. When officers went inside, they found her window broken, her belongings scattered, and clear evidence that someone had been waiting for her to return. The man was never caught. Claire never forgot that night, not because of the horror but because of what saved her. It wasn't logic. It wasn't reason. It was instinct. That ancient primal whisper. We all carry the quiet voice of something within us that senses danger before it is feasible. Fear, so often seen as weakness, became her guardian. It reminded her that fear isn't always an enemy. Sometimes it's a message from the solar signal that something unseen is wrong. The lesson she carried from that night was powerful. Trust your instincts, even when you can't explain them. We live in a world that praises logic, proof, and clarity. We're taught to silence that inner voice, to suppress our unease, to label our fear as foolish. But deep inside us is a compass older than civilization, a knowing that comes not from the mind, but from the soul. Claire's fear saved her life because she chose to listen, not dismiss. Sometimes, the universe whispers only once. It's up to us to hear it. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it is the wisdom to know when that fear is speaking truth. And in horror, as in life, that quiet warning can mean the difference between safety and tragedy. Fear can be our enemy when it controls us, but it can also be our guide when we respect it. Claire's story teaches us that the line between terror and survival is sometimes just one decision, one moment, when you choose to trust what you feel rather than what you see. Fear, in its purest form, is the language of survival. The world might tell you to ignore it, but your soul knows when something's not right. And when that moment comes, don't silence the voice that trembles. Listen, because sometimes, the thing you fear most is what keeps you alive. The second story comes from the icy roads of Colorado in 1982. A bus of travelers heading to Denver was caught in a sudden snowstorm so fierce that it buried cars and silenced the entire highway. The driver lost control and skidded off the road, the bus half submerged in snow, miles away from any help. Inside, the passengers panicked. The wind howled like a living creature, shaking the vehicle. One man, Mr. Daniels, refused to give in to fear. He tore pieces of his coat to make torches, used seat foam to insulate broken windows, and held the coldest passengers, an elderly woman and a little boy, close to his body for warmth. For 3 days, they were trapped. The food ran out, the fire flickered, but his spirit never broke. He told stories to keep everyone awake, reminding them that sleep in that kind of cold meant never waking again. When rescuers finally arrived, all of them were alive. Daniel's frostbitten hands were permanently scarred, but his heart carried something more powerful, a reminder that fear doesn't destroy everyone. It divides. Some collapse under its weight, and some use it as fuel to become stronger. Horror doesn't create character, it exposes it. In darkness, our truest selves are revealed not in comfort, but in crisis. The third story is that of a young soldier stationed in Afghanistan. After losing his best friend in combat, he began hearing footsteps outside his tent every night. He would call out, no answer. Just the crunch of sand and silence. His fear became unbearable, a haunting that drove him to the edge of madness. But then, one night, as the sound came again, he whispered his friend's name and, for the first time, the steps stopped. The next morning, a mortar attack struck the camp, destroying every tent except his. He never spoke about it again, but he wrote in his journal, "I don't believe in ghosts, but I do believe in loyalty that doesn't die." Horror often teaches us that unseen doesn't mean absent. Love, hope, faith, these invisible forces protect us in ways logic never could. When we think we're alone in the dark, something greater might still be walking beside us. The line between life and death, fear and faith, is thinner than we think. In another small town in Kentucky, a family bought an old farmhouse at a bargain price. They thought they'd found their dream home until the nights began. At first it was the sound of footsteps in the hall. Then, banging, whispers, and lights flickering on by themselves. The parents tried to explain it away. The children cried themselves to sleep. One night, the father followed the sound of knocking to the basement and found something buried under the floorboards, human bones. Historians later confirmed that the property sat on unmarked graves dating back to the 1800s. Instead of fleeing, the family chose to honor the dead. They held a small ceremony, prayed for peace, and placed flowers on the site. The haunting stopped. Some horrors are not meant to frighten us, but to remind us. The past never truly disappears, lingers, asking to be acknowledged. Sometimes the scariest thing isn't the presence of ghosts, but the silence of the forgotten. Healing begins when we face what's buried, when we listen to the voices we've ignored. In facing their haunting, that family gave peace to the restless, and, in return, found their own. Not all monsters are outside us. Some live within. A therapist once treated a woman convinced she was possessed. She described voices, shadows, and uncontrollable rage. Through careful sessions, it became clear that those voices were echoes of trauma, her mind's way of screaming for help after years of abuse. The exorcism she needed wasn't from a priest, but from her own buried pain. Sometimes, the true horror isn't supernaturally, it's emotionally. The demons we fear most often wear our own face. Real courage, isn't slaying something dark, is facing the darkness within and choosing to heal instead of hide. And yet, there are people who turn horror into hope. In Romania, an orphan named Anca grew up in a convent, whispered to be haunted. Every night, she prayed not for safety, but for peace, for the souls that wandered the halls. The other children were terrified, but she whispered softly into the dark, "I hope you find the light." Over time, the haunting ceased not because the spirits vanished, but because compassion transformed the energy. Fear dissolved into peace. She proved that kindness can reach places that weapons cannot. Hope, it seems, is the strongest exorcist of all. Some stories come from darkness, others from despair. In Japan, a man once stood on a bridge on a stormy night, ready to end his life. He had lost everything: his job, his family, his reason to live. Lightning flashed, and for a split second he saw his reflection in the water. It was tired, broken, but alive. Something inside him whispered, you're still here. That small voice saved him. Years later, he became a crisis counselor, saving countless lives. Horror teaches us that the night always feels endless before dawn. But no matter how deep the darkness, morning always comes. Surviving another day is not weakness, it's victory. And then there are stories of forgiveness, so pure, they break the cycle of evil itself. A woman who survived a brutal home invasion once stood in court and forgave her attacker. The world called her insane, but she said, "I refuse to let him take my soul." To that act didn't erase her pain, it set her free. Evil doesn't win when we refuse to become it. The greatest strength is not vengeance, but compassion. Light doesn't fight darkness, it outshines it. If tonight's stories unsettled your heart, let them also remind you of its strength. The world will always have shadows, but shadows exist because there's light somewhere behind them. Fear isn't meant to break you. It's meant to awaken you to listen, to feel, to rise. Horror isn't just about monsters. It's about people, ordinary souls, who face impossible nights and still find the strength to move forward. If you are lost, if something dark lingers in your life, remember, every scream, every tear, every trembling breath means you're still fighting. You are stronger than you think, braver than you believe, and never truly alone. May the light within you never fade, even when the world around you trembles. May your fear become wisdom, your pain become compassion, and your story your strength. Amen.